What are we discussing on today's podcast, you ask? Well, it's crossover time with Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres, and we're discussing, is the MLB creating an NBA-style buyout market? And then it's, of course, time for another draft, drafting the players on the worst contracts in baseball, discussing all that on today's Locked On Diamondbacks crossover.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Miller Thomas, host of this wonderful podcast. Follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle, streaming on all podcasting platforms, and of course on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks on there as well. But without further ado, to discuss this new buyout market that we're seeing by Major League Baseball, and of course do another draft, we got to bring on the man of the hour, Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres. Woo. How are you today, sir?
What's going on, man? Doing great on this fine whenever recording. What is it? I'm forgetting what today is. Tuesday evening as we record this for our folks on Wednesday. I hope everyone's doing great. It's hump day.
Oh,
and I'm excited for this one. I'm really excited for this one. I think that it has the potential to get mean. I think it has the potential to get spicy. Yeah. And that's all we can ask for, man, especially with both of our teams, faltering as they are in a variety of ways, with the Diamondbacks having some weird late game losses. And then, the Padres, Yu Darvish going on the IL, them getting swept by the Brewers. It's just rough times. So we're trying our best for the good people to give them at least something,
Hey, we're back on this D-backs bandwagon. We're like 12-4 in our last 16. The D-backs are back, Javi. We're hot.
What?
Yeah.
Are they really? I had no idea.
Yeah, the D-backs are low-key back.
Did they lose that game to the Reds?
They lost
the one that went to like the 14th
Reds.
inning.
Yeah, they lost like one of those.
They lost that one. I guess I projected from that they were still, but I'm not crazy that they were having a downturn, right?
No, it was like a 2-month downturn there. No, prior, like basically before our last podcast, you could have said that. But yeah, we're actually hot right now.
Yeah.
We're back in the postseason mix. Vibes are actually feeling really good, Javi. So
must be nice.
I'm not gonna lie, it feels good. I was in the down in the dumps a couple of weeks ago talking about the D-backs, but full 180. We're back on the emotional roller coaster. We're riding the high right now, and of course, we're gonna be doing that draft. The contract for draft for contracts later in this podcast. And of course, your team had a lot of big contracts, so we might be drafting a couple of those players in our draft. But before we talk about that, let's talk about a different version of contracts being terminated, Javi, and players being put on waivers, because there was this epidemic started by the LA Angels Wednesday morning when out of nowhere we got Jeff Passanbaum, and it's kind of weird. You usually don't get Passanbaums post MLB trade deadline, entering the final stretch of the season. What can Jeff Passan really tweet out that's going to have all of us turn our heads? And little do we know, the Angels were like, you know what? Let's just cut half our roster today. We're going to extend down some good relievers to the waivers. Here's Giolito, who we acquired for like a top 100 prospect, grid check. And I forgot Hunter Renfroe, who's also been a solid dude with a strong arm that has a ton of power. They released 5-6 legit dudes that could help a postseason run. And now I'm like, is this something that we're going to see more in baseball? Are we going to get NBA-style buyout market? Because I wouldn't be mad if you're going to have pending free agents who are maybe they're veterans, and you're like, you know what? We're probably not going to bring them back next season anyway. They're going to hit free agency. Why not just let them go a couple months early? Let someone else pay the rest of their contract and at least give them a chance to be a postseason winner somewhere else. You probably might do that if this is a guy that's been with your club for a few years. But what were your thoughts of seeing the Angels and other teams, just kind of get rid of dudes who are quality major leaguers and see what happens as this unfolds in the final stretch of the season?
I had two reactions. Number one, which is a quick one, which is just as you put in your notes right over. I can never do that when you're trying
which side
right over here where you mentioned, NBA style. That's what I thought of, because as I know we're both fans of the NBA and that absolute drama filled league too. Don't get me wrong. This happens every year, not necessarily for like big name players all the time, but you get those like contributors that it's like, oh, this team might need a backup center. This team might need a backup 6-man or something like that. So, you know, they need a little bit of scoring. They need someone who could guard this player. And that happens, and it helps contenders who already have their roster, their main roster set, like their core set. But they're like, let's get a little bit of extra, you know, let's get a little extra oomph because we're definitely going for it this year. And that happens in the NBA every year. I remember when like Joe Johnson was a big one. I think it was like ISO Joe, as people might know if for NBA heads out there. Like that was one, and that was like a player that helped out. I think he helped out the Jazz a little bit. Not always like enormous difference makers, but with baseball, I was just fascinated by this. And my second reaction was, aside from it being really reminiscent of the NBA, was, my God, I don't like to do the ever, as you know. I've ranted about this before. I try not to give into the recency bias, but man, I mean, I'm trying to think of a worse trade deadline than the Angels.
Yeah.
Because you traded, I know that they're their top prospects, but they were still like top 100 guys that they gave up. I don't have the list in front of me who they gave up for Giolito and the reliever fellow, but that's still like top 100 prospects. And I know the Angels have fallen out of it pretty dramatically, but you're going to get rid of those guys and not even attempt to re-sign them after you gave up prospects for them, and just to save like $8 million or something like that. Like that's one, just speaks to the incompetence of the Angels and Art Moreno as an owner. Yeah. And it also speaks to just baseball as a whole. Like they're just like, see you later, all these guys. And just because we want to save $7 million or whatever it is, like a pretty minuscule amount of money. Like it's insane. It's an epidemic in baseball, as we've talked about a lot, but it's nuts, man. I don't know if this is going to be something that stays with baseball, but my last point, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Okay.
Do you think that they know that Ohtani's gone? And that's why they were like, we need to just cut everybody right now. Because there's no way because if you're allegedly trying to keep this guy and convince him that this is a team that cares about winning and wants to do all this stuff, why would you cut guys like in the middle of this? You know what I'm saying? This isn't, we lost them in free agency. This is like, we're just done. Like, do you think that that's waving the white flag and them saying like, we know this isn't going to work? Because why else would you do that? Because all you're doing is showing Shohei like, yeah, they're cutting guys and they're like, we don't believe in taking this the whole way.
I mean, I just feel like it's showing you that the Angels are just going to tank out the rest of the season. Now that you lost Shohei Ohtani, there's no point of even trying for that postseason berth anymore, because you were doing all this effort to make the wild card to keep Ohtani. But it's like Ohtani's not even going to be playing far back in the wild card. Might as well start unloading these contracts. And I don't even think that they're waving the white flag saying Ohtani's not coming back, because honestly, after that injury, I don't know what's going to happen with Ohtani. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ohtani took just a short-term deal, 2 years, just to rehab with the Angels. You know, that's been the organization has been familiar with. He's not going to pitch at all probably next season. Maybe he still hits. Like, I don't know if he does the Bryce Harper where he's like, okay, I won't be a pitcher next season, but I'll still hit you 50 bombs from the DH spot. Like, that's how impressive Ohtani is. So I don't even know what version we're going to see of Ohtani next season, but you might be like, you know what, I'm hurt, I can't pitch the next year, let me just go back to the team that I'm already comfortable with. I know that training staff, I know the medical people, I'll just get healthy with them for the first year, maybe year two, I'll get healthy, play a little bit, raise my value back up, and I can hit the offseason once again and collect a big check. So I don't really know. I think when you look at all these players getting cut, I think it's justifiable when you look at the Yankees, the White Sox, teams that have been out of it for months, players that are just like, you know what, we don't really care about you, go, you know, to greener pastures. But for a team like the Angels, who, like you said, just all their decision making over the last few months with I was a guy who was pro the trade deadline. I was like, you know what? Zag when everybody else is zigging. You know what? Go all in on trying to keep Ohtani. Maybe it's too little too late, but at least you're finally trying to put together a competent roster around Ohtani. But now it's like you're letting all those players go. You were never able to build a competent roster. All your moves didn't work out. And now you're just cutting those players. Like, you can at least keep those players through the season. Then guess what? Bring back a Giolito. I know he sucked this year for the Angels, but he's still a decent guy. They could probably trade next season if you brought him back. A couple of those other relievers you could bring back. Like, the thing is, these are quality players that you're letting go into free agency. It's not like these are bad players. So it's like you're not going to build a competitive roster next season if you let those guys go, because even though you may not try to build around Ohtani Ohtani for next season, knowing he might be hurt, you still have someone there named Mike Trout. And I feel like we just forgotten, like, yeah, let's stop trying to build a contender around Mike Trout because we're so focused around Ohtani. Mike Trout had just become chopped liver. And it's like, yeah, we don't really care about building a contender for him anymore. It's either Ohtani or bust, and he's the only guy we care about now in the building, which I just think is super unfair to Mike Trout, someone who's considered the greatest player ever by some.
I love how you managed to squeak that in.
Yeah,
there.
that was unnecessary.
Yeah,
I take that back. I'm sorry. I felt nasty as I said that. There was no need.
Even he admits like, oh, that wasn't his fault. He's literally hurt right now. Like, what
I'm
could
sorry,
he do?
Mike Trout. I actually feel so bad with what's happened with you recently.
It's sad. And like, I know people like to make fun of teams that blow up. Someone was making fun of the Padres on Twitter. It was a Brewers fan, hilariously enough, bragging about how they're 19th in payroll beating us. And my thing was like, congrats, you haven't been to the World Series since 82. I don't think you should exactly be flexing that you guys don't pay. Maybe if you did spend, you might actually go farther than this first round. But like, it's just so sad, and it's bad for baseball. It really is. I mean, they have not just one Dan Marino type career on their hands, but another one too with Ohtani, right? Like these two all-timer guys that they went to one playoff series with Mike Trout. Like, it's just baseball malpractice. And you would think that they just luck in there. And it's not like, I know the Astros have been in that division, but there's something called the wild card.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's
we send 3 teams now. We send extra teams to the wild card.
Here's a great example of like, oh, well, they had to recover and they had to build prospects. The Rangers had been recovering for so long, and they like basically in the grand scheme of things immediately made it back to the postseason.
Yeah,
this
spend
year,
money,
like,
you get back. It's crazy.
You get back, and I know that it sucks that the Angels also spent, but they spent poorly too. They didn't do it in the Padres sense, where it was like they spent all of it at once, and as a result, their roster is a little bit thin. The Angels, it's like Josh Hamilton, Albert Pujols.
That was kind of all at once, though. That was like all a decade.
Yeah, those guys were all at once. Yeah, those guys were all at once.
CJ Wilson, they kind of brought in all those guys. And
CJ Wilson, right?
Like, spending doesn't work. Look at these guys, and then
then it's like every year it's like Raisel Iglesias. They signed to a big deal, then they just get rid of him, and now he's killing it out in Atlanta. By the way, which is just low key. People forgot they just like dropped that guy, like not dropped him literally, but like just. You know,
no, I think they did.
I
think they straight up like DFA'd him. I have to look.
Did they DFA him? You have to look it up. But like they got rid of him, and he's a pretty quality closer who could get strikeouts, and he's been good for them. And threw an entire like water cooler onto the field when they got into that fight with the Mariners last year, which was low-key hilarious. They'd had that. You had the Justin Upton contract that was a failure. You have this Anthony Rendon contract that's a disaster that we may or may not be talking about in a little bit. I see that little look in your eye right now. I know what you're thinking. It just stinks. It stinks all the way around, and I hate it. And I don't know if this is going to become the future of baseball or anything, but I know you talked about like, oh, with Ohtani, with the injury and all these things, maybe the D-backs, you know, maybe what did you say? The Sunshine State and all that stuff. We get sun all the time.
365, baby.
Hey, yeah. I really am feeling for Angels fans, and as I said last, or at least on one of the episodes, like I don't like this whole mainstream media personalities will get involved and be like, well, guess what? No one cares about the Angels. Like that's counterproductive, because I think that the Padres are an example of like, if you played well, people will care. But unfortunately they never did. And they had the stars and they just could not do it. And it makes me sad, man. It really does. It genuinely makes me sad.
Yeah, for the record, Reyes Iglesias traded to the Atlanta Braves, not DFA'd. And for Artie Moreno, is there an owner with a worse track record of not being able to build a team, either long-term or short-term? Because he's had a decade with Mike Trout, hasn't been able to do anything, hasn't been able to put a pitching staff. And now all of a sudden, he's making all these short-term moves with the deadline, calling up his first-round pick from like this season. He called up Zach Neto, too, who was like the first-round pick like last season. Like he's messing up the development of these prospects. He's trading for guys to just cut them immediately, trading away top 100 guys. Like everything he's doing is making absolutely no sense. And the Angels are an absolute joke of a franchise right now. And it's crazy considering, as we always talk about, they have maybe the 2 greatest baseball players we've seen since like what, 2000, the last 25, 30 years since like a Barry Bonds. Like it's insane. It's
insane. I mean, the only ones that I could think of is like, you know, Dick Montfort of our divisional out of Rockies.
That's not the only other one.
If you want to go to for previous ownership, like the Mets were pretty bad in the Wilpon era. right? That whole Bernie Madoff stuff and whatnot.
Oh,
Like
next
that was
draft. Worst
yeah,
owners. Worst
yeah.
owner draft. Should that be one?
Ooh, worst owner draft.
Put in the fake spreadsheet. Put in the fake
Put it in the spreadsheet. Put it down. Put it on the board. We might have to do that one next week. But yeah, I mean, as of currently right now, and especially at least the Rockies, the only saving grace between the two is you could be like, well, we don't have Ohtani and Trout. Like, we don't have these generational talents. They're close. They gave up Arenado for a pack of veggie straws. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. But like, it just hurts, man. We got to move on. I can't do it. I feel so bad for Angels fans. And I'm not just saying that.